let me review El Nino again. So normal patterns of El Nino, normal patterns in the Pacific Ocean. Cold water extends, cold water comes up from the poles towards Peru and down from Alaska towards California and then goes out towards Asia across the Pacific Ocean. So it's cold water getting warmer, warmer, and warmer. And we talked about upwelling in the last chapter, and this upwelling brings good fishing for the fishermen of Peru. So these are the normal conditions. And these normal conditions cause monsoons and rain in Asia, upwelling along the west coasts of North and South America, which gives good fishing. If you're ever asked to write about normal conditions or El Nino conditions, make sure you are careful to write about west coast, west coast, because if you just put upwelling along the coast of North America, well, which coast are you talking about? You have to be specific and say west coast. That's very important. All right, El Nino. About every 5 to 8 years, these winds die out. And the water mass that has been building up here in the eastern Pacific Ocean now starts to flow the other way. And now we have warm water off the coast of Peru and California, and it forces the water down. So now there's downwelling, which means no fish, because upwelling brings nutrient water to the photic zone and starts your food chain. Downwelling, there's no nutrients in the water, no food chain, no fish. So El Nino. Warm water mass builds up in the western Pacific. Make sure you always say that. Don't say just the Pacific Ocean. You must say the western Pacific along the equator. The winds die. Warm water flows the opposite direction, which is flowing now east, towards North and South America's west coasts. Again, be very specific. It causes downwelling and no fish. This is bad for fishermen. Now in California, we get a lot more rain because warm water creates clouds. And so we actually have a lot of snowpack, all of our water reservoirs fill up, and that's actually a good thing. But Asia doesn't get their monsoons, and so there's a drought in Asia. These are the health problems caused by El Nino. Make sure you're very specific about health problems. Don't just say more bacteria grows. You need to say flooding brings diseases such as cholera. More mosquitoes because of warmer temperatures that bring diseases such as malaria. Or in California, wetter weather with more rain gives us allergies. It's important to be specific. La Nina is a more extreme normal. Cold water extends further to the western Pacific towards Asia, and you can see that on this graph here. When we have a La Nina, it's actually terrible for California's water supply. We have drought conditions in the west coast of North and South America. But very good fishing on the flip side. Turning the page to 538. This article here shows how we use pollen to study past climate. There'll be some handouts talking about our pollen later on. We have some models about what could potentially happen. You don't have to know the models. On page 540, you need to know what the IPCC is. It's a group of scientists, experts, and government officials to monitor climate change and make recommendations. And they meet every few years and make recommendations and study the current science. On page 541, we have some evidence that temperatures have risen over the years. For an FRQ, make sure you know 2 to 3 of these indicators to be able to write about. For instance, sea levels increased, Arctic ice is thinned, glaciers have retreated, those types of things. Turn the page to 542. That is what happened with Hurricane Katrina. Flood levels are rising. Okay, sea levels are going to rise with climate change for 2 main reasons. Everybody thinks this one is first, but it's not. Sea levels are going to rise because when water gets hotter, it takes up more space. So we call that the thermal expansion of water. And then sea levels will rise because of the melting of glaciers and ice. But first, number one cause is the thermal expansion of water. Make sure you know that. That's very important. Page 543 talks about the negative impacts of climate change. Make sure you can write about 2 to 3 of them on an FRQ. And then we have some possible benefits of climate change. Initially, with more CO2 from burning fossil fuels, we will have more forests because trees like to grow with CO2. That won't last a terribly long time, but that is an initial benefit. Some countries don't mind global warming. Canada, Sweden, Iceland, Greenland. Some of these places will be able to grow more crops and make more money with warmer temperatures. 544. You need to know that plants act as sinks for carbon, so we call them carbon sinks, trees especially, because they turn carbon dioxide into their tissues. A lot of times students think and people think that when a plant takes in carbon dioxide, they change it into oxygen. Actually, that's not correct chemically. Trees actually turn CO2 into their tissues, what makes up their tree bodies. Other things like water and stuff turn into the oxygen that we breathe as animals. So therefore, forests may become more productive because there's more carbon for photosynthesis. And so we end up with a lot of young forests because young forests take in carbon dioxide. They're bigger carbon sinks than older forests. On page 545, we talk about higher sea levels. A consequence can bring salt into our aquifers, contaminating fresh water wells. Here's some human health problems. Memorize 2 to 3 of these to be able to write on an FRQ. A lot of them is heat stress, respiratory ailments from air pollution that promotes smog, more tropical diseases, because if there's not a big freeze, we don't kill mosquitoes with a big freeze. Or actually a big freeze kills the mosquitoes, so without a big freeze, because of higher temperatures, there'll be more mosquitoes. So memorize a few of these for an FRQ. Turning the page to 548. Strategies for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Most of our greenhouse gas emissions come from burning coal. Next is transportation with our cars and our buses and our planes and trains. And then industry, 19%. An Energy Star appliance can actually not just save energy, but also save, you don't have to generate as much electricity at your power plants, and so you don't pollute out as much greenhouse gases and air pollution gases. And so this is what an Energy Star, some examples of what Energy Star appliances can do. Going over to our cars, this is rather sad. Cars have been around for over 100 years and they have not improved the engine efficiency very much. Engines are only 14% efficient. Only 14% of the gas you pump into your car moves it forward, and that is sad. The rest is lost, and you can see here how it is lost. So we need to work on our car technology to, the gas needs to work better for us, not just for our pocketbooks, but also for air pollution and greenhouse gases. Here's some ways that you personally can reduce greenhouse gases. Choosing solar, wind, or hydroelectric electricity, buying a hybrid or electric car, using public transportation, conserving electricity with appliances and light bulbs, riding a bike around instead of a car. Also, reducing the amount of meat you eat. I don't have this here, but I'm going to add it later. When meat production, because of the passing gas of all of the cows, it sounds crazy, but it's absolutely true. Animals produce a ton of methane. Pigs and chickens and cows are the worst. And so reducing the amount of meat you eat reduces the amount of animals that are grown and reduces the amount of methane produced by them. Page 550, the Kyoto Protocol was established in 1997. It was a treaty to reduce greenhouse emissions of 6 greenhouse gases. 193 countries have signed so far. The U.S. Congress still refuses to sign it because they claim it is unfair that developing countries such as China and India do not have to follow emission standards. The U.S., however, produces 25% of the world's greenhouse gases. It is now, by the way, your book calls it the Kyoto Protocol. That's what they call something before it turns into a treaty. It is now considered a treaty, so we call it the Kyoto Treaty nowadays. Turn the page to 552. Here are some options to reduce carbon, and these are kind of new things that are not really in your book. First thing that people are talking about to reduce greenhouse gases is a carbon tax. So if you are a huge polluter of greenhouse gases, you pay extra tax, and that is an enticement for people to buy things like electric cars, hybrid cars, instead of giant trucks that use a lot of gas. And the same thing with people that get their electricity from coal or things like that, you pay an extra tax. Another idea that has been floating around, again, these are ideas, is a carbon offset. It's a voluntary payment to reduce carbon. For example, a coal power plant pays an organization to plant trees to soak up its carbon. This is called carbon neutrality. So there's another idea. Another idea is cap and trade, similar to air pollution. Cap and trade sets limits on emissions from all power plants. Some power plants will cut their emissions way under their limit, which is their cap. It's called their limit. And then sell their remaining allowances of emissions to another company who is over the limit. And so it's an economic incentive for companies and power plants to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. Make sure you also go over all of the handouts that you will get for this chapter as well. They explain a lot of this climate change in ways that are better than the book.